Hey, it's Professor Gould. Let's talk about how we make sense of all of this. Because this is wackadoodle. Really, since there were people have tried to sort living things into categories and make sense of them all. So let's start first of all with some biological definitions of how we sort things and categorize them and study them. A population is a group of individuals of the same species living in the same area. And we define really a population however we as the scientists studying that population want to define it. This is not an inherent natural definition. We could define the population of students at one college and then compare it to a population of students at another college. Or we could talk about population of college students across the country or across the world. Any of those could be a population. We could talk about a population of squirrels in Griffith Park, or we could talk about the population of squirrels in the greater LA area, or in Southern California, or in all of California. As long as we are talking about the same species in the same area, we are talking about a population. Now, populations are part of a community. A community is all of the living organisms in a particular physical space. And again, we as scientists define what physical space we want to study or discuss. So when we define a community, we try to define communities by some sort of natural borders, but a lot of times we put pretty arbitrary borders on those just so that we can discuss them or study them. A community is, again, all the living things, but not the dead or non-alive things. The community of a college includes not just the people, and that, remember, the people would be not just the students, but the faculty and the staff, but it also includes all of the animals, all of the plants, all of the fungi, the bacteria, the worms in the dirt, the microscopic organisms living on the pavement, but not the pavement itself. The microscopic organisms living in the buildings, but not the buildings themselves. The insects crawling around in the buildings and on the grass, but not the buildings themselves. Okay, so it's the living things, not the non-living. That's a community. So a community is made up of many, many populations of different species. An ecosystem is the living and non-living things. So technical terms, living, it means biotic. Bio means life. So the biotic things are the living things. The abiotic, a means not. So literally abiotic means not living. The abiotic environment is all of the non-living stuff. The rocks, the non-living part of the dirt, not the worms and fungus in the dirt, the buildings, the roads, the parking lots, the cars, the discs, the pencil, all of those non-living things are part of the ecosystem, but not part of the community. But they are the things that the communities interact with, live on, live in, etc. The biosphere is all the ecosystems on the earth. So when we talk about biosphere, we're talking about the whole earth, everything on it, living and non-living, literally living sphere. So we're talking about earth. So this is a graphic representation of all that. We can have a population of one single kind of organism, a community of many different living organisms, an ecosystem of the living things and the non-living environment, abiotic and biotic, and then the biosphere is everything on the entire planet. Okay, so that's one way that we can categorize things. Now, species have names, and these names help us categorize things. And all living things have what we call a binomial name, meaning a two-word name. Bi meaning two, nomial meaning name. The first word in the name is the genus. So the name for humans is Homo sapiens. Homo is the genus. A genus is a group of closely related species, all with a common ancestor. The second word distinguishes the species. Homo sapiens, homo means man, sapiens means thinking. So our species name, Homo sapiens, means man the thinker. Yes, it does mean man and not humans, because the people who named it were men. I mean, females are part of Homo sapiens, but they were fairly sexist. Anyway, so we have the genus and the species, sometimes called an epithet, meaning the second part, not meaning a slur. So each species has a two-word name. You will learn to write this correctly, and in fact, you're going to do an assignment where you come up with a species name for yourself. You're going to describe yourself, make a Latin name, and then write it correctly. I don't care what words you use. What I do care is that you write it correctly. And the way it's written is the first word is capitalized, the second word is not capitalized, and then the whole thing is either italicized or underlined. If you're writing it on paper, please always underline, because it's really hard to tell if you're italicizing it or not. So please always underline. That's the easier way to do it. All right, so that's a species. Each species gets its own two-word name, or binomial. Now, species are grouped together in a genus, and then we have created these other groups of organisms, again, to make sense of all of this and to group things together according to common evolutionary ancestry. Each of these groups is called a taxa. A taxon is singular, T-A-X-O-N is singular, taxa is plural. I didn't do this right. Whatever. So a domain is a huge taxon that includes multiple kingdoms. A kingdom is a huge taxon that includes multiple phyla. Okay, so taxa is just a word for a group. And then the way we classify things, every species is part of a genus, each genus is part of a family, each family is part of an order, each order is part of a class, each class is part of a phylum, each phylum is part of a kingdom, each kingdom is part of a domain. Ta-da! All right, so the current system includes 8 levels of taxa. The largest is domain, next is kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. Yes, I do want you to know these taxa, and I want you to know them in order. These are confusing, so we have lots of things that we call mnemonics that help us remember these. A mnemonic is just a memory trick with common words that have the same initial letter to help you remember the initial letters. Okay, so the one that helps for me is, do keep potato chips out for good snacks. This works for me because I like food. I really like potato chips. I like snacks. Okay, if this doesn't work for you, there are a bunch of other ones. But the way this works is the D in do is the same as the D in domain. The K in keep is the same as K in kingdom. P for phylum, C for chips, O for order, F for family, G for genus, S for species. Okay, so all you have to remember is this to help you remember these in order. You still have to remember these, okay? Domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. But that's really hard to remember, much harder than this. Now, if this one doesn't work for you, this one might work. Do kinky people come over for good sex? A lot of people remember that one better. Let's leave that there. All right, let's talk about these taxa. There are a few that I want you to know specifically at this point. The first are the 3 domains of life. The domains of life are characterized by the kinds of cells. And we'll talk more about the kinds of cells in the next chapter. But essentially, there are 2 kinds of cells, prokaryotic cells and eukaryotic cells. Prokaryotic cells prokaryotic cells are a type of cell that does not have a nucleus in it. Prokaryotic organisms are always unicellular. Now you can't say prokaryotic cells are unicellular because a cell is one cell. Unicellular, uni means one. Unicellular means one cell. So if you say prokaryotic cells are unicellular, you're saying unicellular cells are unicellular. Of course cells are unicellular because a cell is one cell. See, when you think about it, that's silly. Eukaryotic cells have membrane-bound organelles inside them. So here's a cell with a nucleus. The cell has a membrane around the outside. The nucleus also has a membrane. And then there are layers of membranes inside that are also other structures inside the cell. So eukaryotic cells are much larger. Eukaryotic organisms may be unicellular or multicellular, meaning more than one cell. Prokaryotic organisms are always unicellular. See the difference there? Okay, so prokaryotic cells don't have nuclei. Eukaryotic cells have nuclei. That's the plural of nucleus. Prokaryotic organisms are unicellular. Eukaryotic organisms are unicellular or multicellular. Got that? Okay, that's an important distinction. Now, prokaryotes are divided into two domains, domain bacteria and domain archaea. Domain bacteria, this is bacteria. This is little single-cell organisms. They live everywhere. They're all over everything, including all of your body inside and out and everything all around you. Okay? Bacteria are everywhere. You are far outnumbered by bacteria in your own body, and that's good. Those bacteria, a lot of those bacteria actually protect you. Not all bacteria are bad. In fact, very few bacteria are bad. Just that the bad ones can be really, really bad. Bacteria everywhere. Archaea are very similar to bacteria, same kind of cell. They have prokaryotic cells, but they're different in some important ways, and one of the main ways is that they are often able to live in very extreme conditions. A lot of archaea are found in places we didn't think life could exist, places like the bottom of the ocean. Extremely salty lakes, extremely hot places like volcanoes and hot vents in the bottom of the ocean, very acidic environments. Archaea are often called extremophiles, meaning that they love extreme environments. Okay? But bacteria and archaea, both prokaryotes. Eukaryotes are everything else, all animals, all plants are eukaryotes. All fungi are eukaryotes, meaning that they have much larger, more complex cells. Okay? Domain eukarya is divided into 4 kingdoms. Well, really 3 kingdoms and another group that we call the protists. The protists used to be a kingdom called Kingdom Protista. They are not anymore because they don't all share a common evolutionary ancestor. And so we don't really know what to do with them yet. We haven't really figured out their evolutionary history for all of them. And so we just lump them together sort of as etc. Okay? These 3 kingdoms are good kingdoms. These all have common evolutionary ancestors. These are all groups that make sense. So we have Kingdom Plantae. These are the plants. Plants are all multicellular. They are eukaryotes, multicellular. They use sunlight to produce sugars by photosynthesis. Except when they don't. Hang on, we'll come back to that, but this is our basic definition. There's some parasitic plants that are really weird. Fungi. Some are single cell, unicellular, some are multicellular. They all decompose or digest dead organisms or use sugar in the environment to power their internal processes. Okay? So those are the fungi. Animalia. All animals are multicellular. They eat and digest other organisms. They may eat and digest plants and or fungi and or other animals, but all animals eat other things. Okay, they can't do photosynthesis. They usually don't eat dead things. Some animals do. All right, and then the protists. They might be single-celled, they might be multi-celled. And the only thing they have in common, literally the only thing that unites all of the protists, is that they are all eukaryotes. Okay, so there are a lot of single-celled eukaryotes that are weird little protists like this one shown here. This is an amoeba. But it is not a bacterium, it's not an archaea, it's a eukaryote. It has a complex cell with a nucleus and other membrane-bound structures inside. But it's a protist, it's not one of these other kingdoms. But again, protists, we're going to end up dividing it into like 100 different kingdoms. It's going to be really confusing. Just be happy right now that we have this like just protists. Okay? Not all unicellular. The only thing that unites protists is that they are eukaryotes. That's the only thing they have in common. And that is the end of our discussion for now of categorizing biodiversity. And that's the end of chapter 1.